Hello and welcome to episode 209 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the fifth and final week of the CDL Major 1 qualifiers. We now know the exact seeds of all 12 teams as we go into the first major of the 2026 CDL seasons, the first major of the CDL season. And I can say this is one of the most surprising ways to finish a qualifiers and the most surprising field that we've seen from a major in quite some time, maybe ever in the CDL's history. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Just really looking forward to this week. Literally 3 days away from first LAN event. Did see just like a couple minutes ago that the Bush Barstool team was having some flight issues because of the ongoing winter storm and stuff. So hopefully that's not a situation we have to monitor too closely heading into the event in Dallas this upcoming week. But it is
Mm-hmm.
something to keep in mind, I guess, just as the storm is going on and affecting seemingly a lot of the country and a lot of places that don't normally have to deal with snow like this. So, um, something I just saw, something to keep an eye on there. But yeah, outside of that, having any unforeseen consequences on the major, I'm really looking forward to this upcoming week and our first LAN of Black Ops 7.
Yeah, hopefully everybody listening or watching is safe and sound. I know we got like 13 or 14 inches, which is, I think, the most that has happened in like either 25 or 50 years, depending on the location. So it's been a really weird weekend, I would say, for a lot of people, I'm sure. And the CDL was no different. Like it was just a very odd time, and in particular because of one team, and that is the Carolina Royal Ravens. The Ravens, as we've talked about over the last few weeks, made a roster change after the break, during the break, where Slasher retired, their veteran AR player, and in his place, Exceed came into the roster, and both of us were very down on the move. We felt that it wouldn't change very much and that Carolina would continue to struggle with Exceed in the lineup. That was completely wrong. That we could not have been more wrong on that subject, because Carolina has won 5 in a row, and are they finished tied for first in the qualifiers, and it's because they had, like I said before, when we talked about these matches last week, I said if Carolina went 2-0, then we'd have some really weird conversations about Exceed for the foreseeable future. And well, they went 2-0, and we're about to have some very weird conversations about Exceed. The first of which was to kick off the week, Friday, January 23rd. Carolina played OpTic, the two-time defending world champions who started undefeated this season. They were the last remaining undefeated team, I think, after week 3 or so. And of course, OpTic has had their fair struggles over the past few weeks as Carolina has been heating up, and those paths kind of met, and Carolina, I don't want to say put a beat down on them, but there were some maps where it was like, this looks like a team that is just significantly better than OpTic, and that's not something that I think either one of us could have predicted. I don't even know going into this week, let alone going into coming out of the break. But this was 3-1. OpTic wins the opening hard point, as they are one to do. And then Carolina kind of decisively wins the next 3 maps and just wins the series. That didn't look like a fluke at all. What did you think of this win and what would become one of the most impressive 2-0 weeks that we've seen from any team?
Yeah, definitely. I think we can look at all the maps individually and break it down super nitpicky, but on a very basic level, the thing that stood out the most to me during this match was the listen in from OpTic in the second half of the Overload. It was just it was honestly like, I don't think frustrating is the right. It was depressing to listen to, honestly. I think that's probably the most apt description. It just was very flat, no energy. Like I can't remember if it was on the flank or the OpTic watch party, but on one of them they were like, "Has Dashy even called out at all during this listen in?" Like I think that was from the flank, but I could be mixing them up because I was trying to watch both at different times to see how those people were reacting to this match in particular. But it was brutal, and I think that like that's obviously only a 1 to 2 minute break into like 1 to 2 minute look into the comms for OpTic in that specific match where they kind of were getting, they were kind of getting spit on a little bit by Carolina, and Carolina was dominating in that match. So maybe they were deflated because of that, but obviously as, back-to-back world champs and multiple major event winning players, like you would expect they're able to keep their cool and not let something like 5 minutes of overload just completely derail their confidence or whatever in this particular match. So I don't know if that's more of a one-time deal or a look at potentially what's been going on over the last couple weeks with OpTic, and whether that's like if that's the comms that OpTic have been dealing with since returning to the winter break. Like I'm not really surprised by what's happened with them and their struggles, but I'm more likely to lean towards the fact that this was more likely a one-time deal here. But who knows? That's just something to keep in mind, I guess. Um, but yeah, for about 2 days, Lurks had the overload kill record in Black Ops 7 with 39 in this map. He really played well in this map in particular, and Nero just popped off all weekend, played very well in this series, and that's something we've talked about with him, not only this year but in years past. Like he has this potential to um, be a superstar slayer in this league. It's just finding the consistency to do it on a consistent basis, and that's what he's been lacking. But seemingly this weekend he was able to have two pretty strong showings against two of the quote unquote top teams in the league heading into the season. And Scump was even praising Carolina's play in the map forward then hard point. I put down a couple basic quotes from him from the watch party as I was watching live. Scump just said, "We're getting shit on, and their teamwork is so effing good," and that was in reference to Carolina. So, yeah, like you said, after that map one, it was basically all Carolina, and I really like. I will get into Carolina more with the Thieves match later to end the weekend, but this was really like I think for Pickham's sake, I went with Carolina, but definitely it was a match before all the hype and everything. I like you said, very few people probably were more willing to pick Carolina over OpTic, but after this week, I don't know. I mean, Carolina, that's the thing we've been saying. Like, can they do it? How are they going to look after the pickup? And then they just keep winning since adding Exceed. So it's more of a question now of is anyone able to beat them?
Yeah, and I was, like I mentioned when I was kind of introing this match, it was OpTic was the final undefeated team. They definitively came out looking the best this season because you had FaZe, they got 3-0'd right out of the gate by LAT. You had LAT get 3-0'd by Paris. Paris lost to FaZe, and then there was OpTic. OpTic was able to finish the first part, the pre-break portion of the schedule, with a 3-0 record. And then since the break, they have been different, and not in a good way. They've played 4 matches since they've come back from the break, and they've won only 1 match, and that 1 match was against the Vancouver Surge, who are in dead last. Vancouver finished the first major qualifiers with a 1-6 record, tied for the worst, and they had a 4-20 map count, which is by far the worst. No other team won fewer than 13 maps. So that was the only win that OpTic was able to manage post break. They got 3-0'd by FaZe, 3-1 by LAT, and then now 3-1 against Carolina. So against 3, I would say, of the top 6 teams, certainly going into the major, they have a combined 2-9 record. in those matches. And I, like you said, you pointed out the communications. I have no idea why things change with this team. And I felt that way last year, and it turned out to be some kind of pred situation at the beginning of the season. But even mid-season, when they made the change to get Kenny out of there, like, I just didn't understand, how does a team that has so much talent and has so much championship pedigree, it's not like an inexperience with these guys, how does it kind of fall apart so easily and so often for a team like this? And I still have that question. I don't understand how it can get so bad for a team like this to finish 4-3 in the qualifiers, which isn't horrible by any means, but when you start 3-0, when you have a 4-1 start, to go 4-3, to only go just above 500 in map count, that does seem to be almost kind of a failure for this team, and they have absolutely no momentum going into the first major of the season as well, which, momentum is not real, according to some people. For me, it feels very real. It feels like a very legitimate thing that teams kind of deal with, either good or bad. So I had no idea why OpTic is the way it is. Carolina, I think the easiest way to point out why the way they are right now is Exceed came into this roster, and maybe, I said, I think on the last or second to last episode, like, MVP Exceed. I still believe that, even though, like, he's not the best player, quote unquote, on this team right now, like, but he seems to be enabling these other players to kind of unlock something that they weren't able to tap into before the break. And they started, I think, 1-2 on the season, if I'm not mistaken. They lost to Boston, and then so they're 0-2. They lost to Boston and to the Falcons, 3-1 against Boston, 3-0 against the Falcons before the break, and then since then, beat Miami 3-1, beat Minnesota 3-2, beat Toronto 3-1, beat OpTic 3-1, and then we will talk about their second match later this week. But think about those last 3 wins and how impressive that is, that they beat Toronto, they beat OpTic, and they beat LAT to finish these qualifiers. It's kind of akin to the run that we were talking about with FaZe Vegas a few weeks ago, where they just went through the top 5 of the league and were able to win. And then we kind of claimed that FaZe was the best team in the league. I want to loop back to that when we talk about Carolina's second match of the week in just a little bit. Anything else on OpTic versus Carolina before we move on?
Nope. I think big picture stuff is just, this was another week where OpTic play just one match, and we talked about that last week. Like, when you only play one match in a week, and especially now OpTic have played 2 matches in 2 weeks, like, it is very very easy for Greenwall fans and OpTic supporters to overreact. I don't know if it can be classified as an overreaction now, but obviously in the grand scheme of things, they're still defending world champs, and it's only a couple losses heading into a major. Like, if they come out and show up at the major, it is what it is. But that's got to be the big concern for OpTic heading into this event now is, what is the squad going to look like when we get back on land? It's very possible that OpTic is able to flip the script and perform better on land with the support of the fans in Texas, and all that good stuff with the Greenwall there in person. But confidence wise, the Greenwall definitely has to be feeling it a little bit, as opposed to if they had just came out and took care of business against LAT and Carolina last 2 weeks.
And OpTic last year, we saw, I would say the reason not to be optimistic is that OpTic turned it around online before they got to LAN, and they started, especially in the latter, I guess, 4th of the season and the major 4 qualifiers, they started to look a lot better online, and then it kind of just bled into what happened on LAN over the next 6 weeks. That obviously hasn't been the case now, and they're ice cold going into a very important major this coming weekend. Next up, though, we had Toronto versus the Paris Gentlemates. We talked about this. It was one of the more anticipated matches of the weekend. to have two of the top 5 teams playing each other, two teams that have looked vulnerable in the last few weeks as well. Neither one have been pitcher perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And I would say that kind of continued into this series. Neither one were just completely dominant. Toronto wins the first map of this series. Then Paris comes back. They win 6-1 S&D. Toronto comes back. They win 3-0 overload. And then Paris makes this big comeback on hardpoint to even up the series, and I think that gave them just an extra bit of a boost going into the final S&D where they win 6-3. We split our picks here as we did with OpTic versus Carolina. It kind of shows how unpredictable things have been as of late in the CDL. Were you surprised by anything? What did you think of these two teams' performance in a Paris 3-2 win?
The fact overall that it was a 3-2 came down to a game 5 is definitely not surprising to me. Like, that's what I thought going into this, that either team could win, and was expecting it to be a close match, and it technically was. I think the biggest difference was Gentlemates were able to take care of business in the S&Ds, and they won 6-1 and 6-3. So obviously that was the leading catalyst there. It wasn't a Neslo because Gentlemates were able to win map 4, but in that map 4, Toronto got off to a very hot start, and Gentlemates just basically erased the start and took care of business from there. Like, you look at the score, that the final score was 250 to 173. If you didn't watch the match, you'd have no idea that Koi was up almost 100 points. It was 104 to 8. Very early in the game. So, that's just dominance after the first couple of hills from Gentlemates. And I will say, the one thing that I said last episode heading into this one was I was expecting Thieves to play well and be the catalyst for a Toronto win. And, Joe did his job. He was playing extremely well in the respawns in particular, but just wasn't enough to carry Toronto to the finish line. So I think the S&D is a good sign from Gentlemates, especially I don't remember if they played once or twice. Well, I just remember Gentlemates played Falcons last week, and they choked the S&D on raid when Sib was like going for the World Star snipes mid-map. That's sticking in my mind very, very closely. So it was a good bounce back in the S&D department in that regard, but yeah, at this point in the weekend, I wasn't even thinking about it, so I don't think we mentioned it at all last episode, but Toronto were technically in the losers bracket with this loss. Like, if the qualifiers ended following their game, they would have started the major in the losers bracket, and that would have been a huge shock to me. I wasn't even like thinking about that or thinking they were in contention to be in that position. So definitely a big win for Gentlemates, and some stuff we're gonna have to look at with Toronto heading into the major.
Yeah, let's just loop in the second match that they had, because they started off on Saturday against G2 Minnesota, and so they lose 3-2 to Paris. No shame in that, really, because Paris is one of the best teams, and if they had kind of kept their momentum in that second hard point, maybe they're able to close out the series in map 4. In the series against G2 was completely different. They lose 250, 191 in the hard point, and then G2 wins 6-2 on S&D, 2-0 overload, and they get swept by Minnesota. Again, like, we should talk about, because I mentioned it last week, and I think it's worth mentioning, Minnesota has been very close to winning a lot of their matches, and last week they did beat FaZe in a very big upset. So coming into this, we mentioned, like, if Minnesota is able to kind of bring some of that they showed against FaZe into this series, they definitely could beat Toronto, and they get their first sweep of the season, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to look if they beat Minnesota, or did they beat... So they beat C9 3-2. Yeah, so this was the first 3-0 of the season either way for them, which is great for Minnesota because they've had a ton of those game 5s. How much of this do you think says something about Minnesota? How much of this is Toronto? Because now Toronto, like you just mentioned, was basically like, if other teams won their series, this could have put them in the losers bracket.
Yeah, I think I was mixing up the losers bracket talk there from the
Yeah.
last match with this one, but same thing at the end of the day. Um, I really think this was like you mentioned, two back-to-back matches out of Minnesota where they took down quote-unquote top teams, and a lot of people just seemingly weren't expecting it. And the biggest question I have now is, does this mean the preseason G2 or the preseason Minnesota that everyone was hyping up a little bit, are they back? Did they just hit a little lull and then have to kick it into high gear after the holiday break to come back into form? I don't know what could have happened. The biggest thing, though, and it shows in map 1 of this series, is once again a team allows G2 to play on Colossus. And we said it, I said it last week as like, partially a joke, but it's partially a serious thing at this point. Like, if people are naming the map Kremplossus as a meme, it still carries some weight to the point of, like, obviously G2 are playing well on this map. Why do we continue to ego chow them on a map that they're clearly comfortable on? And that's got to be something that's looked at. I think, spoilers here when we get to I won't say it, when we see G2's first match at the major. If Colossus Hardpoint is a map that is played in the first round, I will absolutely lose my mind. I'll just say that. I'll hold the rest for our preview show tomorrow. But yeah, this was really, Estriel was playing very well in the series, and I think whoever they played before they played FaZe, I think he had a pretty uncharacteristically poor series. I remember talking about that. So obviously, if Estriel's playing well, that's really a really good sign for G2, because I still think he has the highest potential to be a superstar player on that G2 team. Mamba did have a 10 streak to end the Colossus hardpoint in this, though, and that's definitely, shout out Mamba, that just went Mamba mode on him and put the team on the back a little bit there. But yeah, I mean, it was just a really strong showing out of G2 again, and that it is two very impressive wins to end their qualifiers, where Toronto has 2 losses heading into the major. So it's teams, again, you mentioned momentum. Whether you believe in it or not, it is teams with 2 drastic ends of the spectrum of momentum heading into this weekend's tournament.
Yeah, so Toronto, they have really lost 4 of their last 5, because if you're looking at the final match of the second week before the break, of all of the matches, they lost 3-2 to FaZe, and then they had the break. They come out, they 3-0 LAT. Since then, 3-1 loss to Carolina, 3-2 to Paris, 3-0 to Minnesota. It's kind of in the same vein of OpTic, is just like, what happened to this team? Like, is it just a schedule thing? Because you could say, with Toronto in particular, that they played Carolina, who's been red hot. They played Paris, who's definitely one of the best teams, even if they're not playing at their best, it seems. And then Minnesota, who seems to be kind of clicking into shape as well. So is it just a schedule thing? I'm really not sure. But Minnesota, it just seems like I think they were underrated after a bunch of those 3-2 losses, and understandably so. Like, when you lose to the Falcons, you lose to Carolina, especially at that point. Carolina, we weren't entirely sure if they were for real or not, because they had only played Miami and Minnesota, both teams that had struggled to that point. But Minnesota also, they lost to Boston before the break, 3-2. So I just think they were underrated, and now, they might be a little bit overrated going into this major, or they might just be properly rated now, because all these other teams are kind of coming back down to earth. Like, Paris does not look nearly as unstoppable. OpTic is obviously much more vulnerable now. Even FaZe, it looks to be more human than what they appeared after that big win streak against some of the top teams. So this just adds a lot of flavor to what's going on in the CDL this season. Both these teams finished 3-4, which is not something that I would have really predicted. Maybe Minnesota finishing 3-4, but Toronto, with what their schedule seemed like, I wouldn't have predicted that. and they really needed, like, both of these teams were in a tiebreaker for a four-way tie for seventh and eighth place with Miami and Boston, which we'll get to their matches very soon as well. And then on Saturday we had the Falcons and C9 New York play each other. We both predicted a Falcons win. It did happen, but this was about as close as you can get to the series flipping. C9 wins two of the closest maps of the season, a round 11 Colossus S&D and a 250-244 Den Hardpoint. The Falcons win it otherwise. Very dominant first hard point from them. They win exposure overload, and then they close it out with Raid S&D 6-1, which I think the biggest thing coming out of this series for C9 is how badly the game fives went for them in the Major 1 qualifiers. They lost all 5 of their game fives. They had 1-6 record. 5 of their losses were in game 5. They lost to Minnesota 3-2, lost to Miami 3-2, lost to Paris 3-2, lost to Boston 3-2, and then here in their final match of the qualifiers, they lost to the Falcons 3-2. What can really be said about these two teams? Basically the exact opposites. Way to end. The Falcons finished on this massive win streak and tied for first, and then C9 finishing tied for last. Overall thoughts on the Falcons 3-2 win here?
Yeah, I think the 3-2 magic words there. Another game 5 loss for Cloud9 is just, we'd have to go back and look at actually what Minnesota's game 5 record was last year, but they're on pace to have more game 5 losses than Minnesota last year, I feel. Because I know at points early in the season last year, Minnesota were forcing the reverse sweeps and they were actually closing some out. It got later in the season when they got to the point where they weren't winning those game 5. So not sure exactly how close they would be. But I mean, 0-5 in game 5, like that's going to be something we have to keep an eye on the rest of the year to see if there's any improvements in that regard. That's the one thing for Cloud9 that obviously, overall record isn't great, but they are getting some map wins. So if they do manage to turn things around, that bodes well for them in terms of like map count tiebreaker as the season progresses, because that's like them in Vancouver, it's still 10 CDL points each, but the map count is just drastically different for having the same record, which is it's kind of funny to look at. But regardless, yeah, with Falcons, I thought, Xnid has been one of those players that we've talked about at different points this year in terms of, is he going to step up? Is he the right player to be surrounded by 3 former world champions, yada, yada. And in this series, he played very well in basically all the maps that Falcons won. And, that's what's going to happen. What's going to happen if Falcons are going to actually be a contender at this event. You've talked about Kismet a little bit in recent episodes too. He played well in both hard points. You know what you should get from Celium and Pred if the other two guys step up, and even if they're in a position where they're leading the way in kills for this team, the consistent slaying from Celium and Pred, even if it's a little lower in that individual map, it should mean that Falcons are in a good position to outslay their opponents and potentially win in respawn. So that's a sign of potentially good things to come for Falcons. We'll have to see if this recent surge translates to land for them, but Xnid in particular went 17-10 in the first half. I felt like I was writing it a lot this weekend in our notes. There were a lot of just like first half explosions of like 15 plus kills from players in Overload, and I was trying to think like maybe it's just the nature of Overload versus like capture the flag, so maybe I should have went back and looked at like Blitz gameplay and stuff, but like it felt like there were a lot of first halves this weekend where just like some players were dropping ridiculous numbers in the first halves, and it just seemingly came out of nowhere. I felt like early on we saw a lot of like even slaying across the board. So maybe that's just another evolution of Overload. We have more to talk about on the Overload front when we get into this next match too. But Yeah, and in terms of this, I did think it was kind of funny in the game two S&D. C9 went up 4-0, then Falcons won 5 rounds in a row to go 5-4, and then Cloud9 won the last 2 rounds. So it was very, seesaw-ish in the game two. Um, but I mean, the fact Cloud9 were able to win a round 11 at least bodes a little bit well for them in terms of possibly getting around a game five victory at some point this season. But outside of that, yeah, I just think pretty strong performance from Falcons, even though some of the individual maps were rather close. Um, but I think the big picture thing is we got to see if Falcons are able to, carry over this recent production to LAN.
Yeah, and I think also their schedule would probably be considered one of the weaker slates if you're comparing, some of the top seeds because they didn't play. They played Paris, but I think that was the only team that they or only top team they beat because they opened the season with losses against LAT and OpTic. So then they ended up getting their wins against Boston, Carolina before their roster change, Minnesota, like I said, Paris, and then C9. So, if you're looking at it, you might say like, I personally think that the Falcons definitely have to keep proving it against, if they have to play FaZe or, play LAT, all these other teams, again, see how things work out. C9, on the other hand, like it is what it is, I think, right? Like you finished tied for last, technically not last because they had the tiebreaker over Vancouver, but to go 1-6 in your map count was 13-18, which is not that far off from Boston, who finished 15-17 in map count, but 3-4 and had a tiebreaker that could have put them in the winners bracket. Like that's a really tough way to have your qualifiers go. Yeah, and so C9, I think they are definitely to be reckoned with in the losers bracket. Like that's not a team that's like, yeah, it's going to be an easy match, but they haven't shown any way to actually get through and win those matches when it counts, though. So we'll have to see what happens when we get to the first major. Next up, we had LAT versus Boston, team I just mentioned. Very back and forth series. Neither team was really able to take complete control of this match. Boston wins very close hard point. LAT decisively wins the S&D. Boston wins the overload. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then LAT wins the final two maps of the series, 250-168 on Den, hard point, and then 6-1 Den S&D. A really big win for LAT, of course, because they could not really go 0-2 this week because that would have been kind of a disaster. Even if they're in the winners bracket, it would have been a pretty big disaster just from the optics of everything going into the major and all of the talk around Kenny and a roster change and everything. So what did you think of LAT's win here?
Yeah, I that first map really gave me some flashbacks to different points of last year, but I'm pretty sure it was Major 2, winners bracket round 1 in particular when Boston upset LAT. Um, Boston wins that first map, Colossus hardpoint, and I'm starting to think in the back of my head like, uh-oh, here we go again. Boston's going to do it once again. But it is worth mentioning there was a pretty questionable set of spawns on one of these hills here towards the end where it looked like a BZ should have been blocking the spawns, but, just Call of Duty spawn things kept didn't go LAT's way, and Boston were able to close things out. But LAT did put up a good effort. It looked like Boston was going to kind of steamroll this map at one point, and then um, LAT were able to fight back a little bit, but Boston just closed it out in the end. So, that was a good showing out of Boston. LAT, it's kind of similar to the General Mates series earlier against Toronto. They look pretty dominant in both S&D 6-2 and 6-1, so that's basically the difference maker here. But as you kind of alluded to, and I even mentioned a little bit ago, the overload is definitely worth mentioning here. Like I was saying, first half, again, Boston just kind of dominated. 19 kills from Cammy, 15 from Snoopy, and 14 from Nasty. I didn't write it down, but I think it was either like 11 or 10 was the most kills from someone on LAT. So just like severely outslayed them in the first half. And then Boston tried to do, which has affectionately been coined the park the bus strat, which I don't know how I feel about that name for it, but
That's just a soccer
basically,
thing too. So
oh, okay. Um, the camping strat on defense where you just hold the ball and overload the device in the back of your spawn and play defense. We saw they started trying to do it either like 4 minutes or 3.5 minutes left in the second half, and it took about a minute, minute and a half, but LAT were able to break that setup, take the device, and get a very quick cap like after it. So this was um, the opposite of what we talked about when Falcons did it, where they were just successfully able to do it for like two-ish minutes, and held it effectively, and they weren't broken. In this instance, we saw an example of a team um, trying the strat, and then it failed, but it just didn't. It led to a cap, but Boston were able to still win the map, so it didn't, you know, it didn't snowball into more than one cap after that, I believe, because I'm pretty sure LAT had a first half cap. Um, but regardless, this was just, it was another example of uh, this strat being implemented in Overload. Just we got to see what it looks like when a uh, a team is able to break the setup and score. We just weren't able to see the next evolution of that, which I assume is like worst case scenario of this, where a team is trying to do the defensive strat and then they get broken. That one team caps it, and then they like rally off one or two more caps after that, and the other team that had the lead just completely fumbles and loses all momentum. So I'm not sure how possible that is, but that seems like the next step in what we could eventually see from this strat. I saw Nameless had a pretty interesting take, where he said like the pros need to GA this strat, which that would be taking GAs to a whole new level. And I think this just goes back to what we were discussing either last episode or 2 episodes ago, where Marky B was talking about potential changes to Overload and whether those exact changes are what have to be made. I think the consensus at this point is that changes are necessary, regardless what they are, to Overload. And I'm hopeful that after Major 1, obviously depending on how it plays out on land, we'll see some stuff maybe tweaked to prevent this park the bus stuff.
yeah, I think the one that actually seems to be lingering is pausing the timer when someone
Yeah.
has the ball, which effectively eliminates any the effectiveness of actually keeping the ball in your hands and just letting the time run down. I also like the idea of like first half you get three goals or whatever, 3 points in, let's just say, like 90 seconds. The other team should have 90 seconds to get 3 goals or more, I guess, or you win the game. I kind of like those ideas. I think the easiest one to obviously implement would be the timer. um, we'll see. I guess like where there's not much time in between Major 1 and the Major 2 qualifiers, but obviously I said that when Marky B had suggested initially, like that is the time to make the change, because then you have all of those online qualifier matches to really see how it works out before you actually get to land. But that is relying heavily on the CDL ops and the Treyarch devs to come up with that solution and agree to it and actually implement it before teams are set to play their Major 2 qualifiers. And I both think I just don't know if that's actually gonna actually happen.
One other thing, just on the series, real quick. Thought I should mention it. Scrap in the game 5 went 9-2 with the sniper and had some pretty impressive kills with it at different points and in different rounds. Um, I could be wrong, but obviously I have watched all of the matches so far this year, and this felt like to me the first time Scrap really like went off with the sniper, and possibly the first time he used it. He might have used it at different points, and like it just wasn't shown on broadcast, or I'm just really faded and don't remember the early matches from like before the break. But it was the first time where it really stood out to me that Scrap was popping off a little bit with the sniper, and I think he even mentioned it. in the post game interview that he's been playing a lot of S&D chows. There've been some funny videos with Jay and Fatty, who are a part of Meal Team 6 with Methods. He was playing some wagers with Kason, like
Mm.
against them, and then he was playing wagers with Jay and Fatty, I believe, at different points. So maybe that's like, Scraps trying to get in his S&D bag a little bit and improve there, and maybe that's like the next step too for LAT and potentially getting them to the next level. So something to keep an eye on there for future LAT matches as well.
Yeah, I saw the clip where he's playing with Kason and he's like, "Do you got bomb?" And
Yeah,
Kason's like, "Yeah,
yeah,
I got bomb." And they planted, and he was like, "I'm done," and he just quit the game. Um, Definitely feel that. Sunday, January 25th, Genomates versus Miami. Must win here for the Heretics because of the winners bracket implications. If they lost, they would be in 3 and 4, and because of the tiebreakers, they would automatically go into the losers bracket. Paris obviously trying to compete for an even higher seed. I think they were effectively already guaranteed a spot, regardless of the result here. And Miami, I this is obviously like a really winnable series for them. Looking back on it, like they choke the first map, they lose 250 to 240, and then the second map they're able to win 6-3. They lose 3-1 in or on exposure overload, and then lose 250-166 on Scar Hardpoint. There were definitely points in this series where I was like, Miami just seems to be like a step behind, and I think it might just be like Trakes is very new and they're still getting used to him and everything, even though he played well in some of these maps. But another loss for Miami. It definitely has to be considered a disappointing stretch here in the Major 1 qualifiers. As for Paris, they have to feel pretty good about this. They did not play their best over this, especially the second half of the qualifiers, and yet they were able to finish on a strong note with a winning streak and go into the first major with some momentum. What did you think of this series?
Yeah, I think second time this weekend we saw Gentlemates erase a very big lead. They did it against Toronto in Hardpoint, and then here against Miami in Map 1. Miami were up 101 to 17, and Gentlemates were able to, bounce back and win, which is, obviously for a team that you and I and other people have had elevated expectations for, you probably would not want to see them go down 100-ish points in multiple hard points in the same weekend. But the fact that they are resilient enough to bounce back is definitely a good characteristic and a good sign of potentially championship aspirations. So that was a definitely an interesting way for the series to start. But like you said, Trakes definitely played pretty well this weekend and had the most kills in that map 1 in particular. Um, the interesting thing here was we talked about Gentlemates winning the 2 search and destroys against Toronto, but that is the only map that they lost in this series to Miami. So, what does that mean for is that a sign of maybe Gentlemates being more well-rounded than we were previously alluding to, or is it, matchup dependent? We've talked about Miami's S&D last year, like Super going 10-5. Rencor had a 1v2, so it's not like Miami or S&D slouches or anything. So it could just be a case of Miami showing up in this particular S&D, but. I think all things considered, it was an important win for Gentlemates just to, we keep saying momentum at this point, but, you know, going 2-0 with 2 wins heading into the major is definitely better than having a loss and having that in the back of your head thinking about other things. Um, the other element of this is that Miami were guaranteed a spot in losers with this loss, and that was, given the state of Miami at the start of this season and the visa issues and stuff, I guess it's not totally surprising, but it is still a little weird given how strong Miami looked, especially towards the end of last season. So we'll have to see if they're able to make some sort of losers bracket magic happen here.
Not even momentum. I think just giving Paris some confidence and just like how they are able to win these series, because this is the most decisive win that they've had in 6 weeks. Granted, they've only played 3 or 4 matches, but they really struggled against C9. We talked about at the time that C9 should have won that series. They had a real chance to sweep Paris in that third map, and then Paris was able to reverse sweep. And then Paris loses 3-1 to the Falcons in a series that we talked about. Paris most definitely should have gone up 2-0 at the very least, and then it just got away from them very quickly. And then they had the series against Toronto earlier in the week where they go to game 5. This one, they were able to actually close it out in 4. And, granted, I would also say that Miami had a chance to go up 2-0 in this series if they're able to close out that hard point in map 1. I hate to be the person to be like, well, because they would close out map 1, then automatically you add their map 2 victory and then they're up 2-0. But I'm just saying, like, it's obvious that they could have been up 2-0 with that hard point win, and it just didn't work out for Miami. Worked out very well for Paris. They finished the Major 1 qualifiers with a 5-2 record, technically the number 1 seed going in to Major 1. They had an 18-11 map count, which is pretty impressive considering some of the teams that they played. And Miami, like we said, starting the losers bracket, they had a 4-way tie for 7th place at 3-4, but because of the tiebreaker, G2, Minnesota, and Toronto both got above them, and Miami and Boston were on the outside looking in as we go into the first major of the season. And then we get to one of the most interesting matches of the entire season to this point in Carolina versus LAT. Obviously, we've been teeing up Carolina this entire episode, so we know how this ends, and it is a 3-2 win for the Royal Ravens, but it was nearly a reverse sweep for LAT. This could have been a really great story for the Thieves going into Major 1 to kind of bounce back from all of the, I wouldn't even say turmoil because it was more on the outside, it seemed, than on the inside, but certainly a lot of talk and chatter around Kenny and roster change and whether LAT could even win matches with this roster as constructed. And they nearly do it here. They go down 2-0, 250-163 on Blackheart, Hardpoint, 6-4 raid S&D, and then one of the most dominant overload performances of the season, 7-0 LAT. Den Hardpoint 250-116, so nearly a 100-point club for the Thieves. And then they go to Colossus S&D, go to round 11, and I think it was a 15-second round 11 or something like that. And Carolina wins that round 11. They win the map 6-5, win the series 3-2, and Carolina extends their win streak to 5, send LAT to another loss, and certainly kind of in a weird position going into Major 1 as they have been for a while. So what did you think of this series, and obviously Carolina capping off this incredible win streak as they go into the first major?
Yeah, I mean, my whole thing last episode was I thought this was going to be extremely tough for Carolina to go 2-0 this week, just given the teams they were playing against, and I kept saying, like, this is going to be the real test for Carolina, all this, yada, yada. They just didn't give a crap about any of that, and they came out and got a big win here. It's definitely there are some elements to this. I don't want to take anything away from Carolina. I saw Brian Saints was tweeting something about the like division of where the players are. Somebody's in California and I thought it was, he said 3 players on the East Coast, I think, but like Exceed was playing from the OpTic headquarters at one point because the league sent like the PC for Neum to the OpTic headquarters, so Exceed was playing from there at one point. But regardless of any of that, I do think that another element of this series was at the end, but when they were down 2-0, the LAT boys were laughing and smiling and giggling, and some people on the watch parties in the flank were having issues with that and stuff. I think from the outside looking in, it felt like to me that, that doesn't have a great look to it. At the same time, I think it's very possible that there were some ping or server issues going on in this map, and the players just took it upon themselves to like shrug it off and be like, oh well, we'll potentially play these guys on LAN again coming up here soon. That'll be the real game. This is just an online game. It is what it is. The biggest thing that makes me think about the ping aspect, though, in particular, was Craze in this series in particular. Did I not write down his scores? Craze really struggled in maps 3 and 4, but played pretty well in maps 1 and 2, I believe. So that was what got me thinking that maybe there was something going on with the server, or the ping, or whatever, and that was leading to Craze having struggles statistically, and also could have led to the lopsided scores for LAT. But all that's done and dusted now. Can't loom on it anymore. I did the 7-0 win in the overload was pretty funny. Kenny literally went for like a 360 like cap, and I was like, yeah, this is like they're having some fun now. Hydra really put on a show in that overload too, and he had one play. They're calling it top green on Scar, where it felt like, again, from a viewer perspective, Hydra was trying to, how in like CTF in the past, like they had that little like triangle indicator. If you were like, if I had the flag and you're against me, and like you can just see it like in like a 3 or 5 second like blip where that indicator is. It felt like Hydra was trying to juke that, and like he like went right and timed it and then went back left, and like everybody on Carolina like seemingly was looking right, so it looked like he timed it perfectly from a viewer perspective. Obviously don't know what it looked like in game, but I thought that was a pretty sick move. Hydra just had some pretty nutty wall bounces and stuff in that map in particular, but yeah, we got to give Carolina their flowers. They showed up when people had pretty, I don't know if they had plenty of reasons to doubt them, but Carolina had plenty of reason, or people had reasons to doubt that Carolina would go 2-0 this week, just because they hadn't truly been tested by these quote unquote top dogs yet. But they showed up and they got big wins, and now we were kind of joking, but kind of not joking last episode about Exceed MVP or Carolina the best team in the league, yada yada. Now it's time to see what they can do on LAN, and again, not going to spoil stuff for the preview show, but this is going to be a matchup we see in the first round at the major, and I cannot wait.
Yeah, I thought the laughing thing was weird after game 5, like right after round 11, when they cut back to the players and LAT is fist bumping and laughing and smiling. I mean, I'm not one to like micromanage like emotions or whatever. I legitimately thought when they cut back, I was like, wait, did LAT win that round 11? Because I think it was a 1v2, and I think a BZ might have been in the 1v2, and the Carolina guys were like coming in really hot. And I was like, I thought I just saw a BZ die, and then you just see the LAT guys and they're smiling, and Carolina didn't look particularly happy after the map, which I'm not entirely sure what was going on there. So it was very weird. I think I'm just not a fan of like that mentality of players being like this is BS, like we'll get them on LAN. It's like, will you though? Like I saw what LAT was like at the end of last season on LAN, and it wasn't great, and that was kind of like it was becoming an indicator of the online matches as well at the end of the season. And I think there's a bigger correlation from online to LAN than a lot of players like to admit, because how many times have we actually seen where a team is like absolutely god awful online and then is just like great on LAN, or vice versa? Yeah. I just don't think there's a ton of correlation. Like I remember very vividly Octane saying that about the Surge at one point, and it was like, you are like a 9th place team like this entire season, and that never changed one bit. Granted, they did do a little bit better once they got to LAN, and I believe that was during one of the COVID years, so they got a lot of online matches. But at the same point, it wasn't like they went from being a bottom 4 team to a top 4 team from online to LAN. And I personally don't think that'll be what happens here with LAT. They might be able to beat Carolina on land because this was, again, a game 5 round 11 situation. So I don't think if you just flip the round 11, like it's like, well, obviously LAT won it because it's on land. I think these are two very evenly matched teams, and that's a huge credit to the Royal Ravens. They should not be in this position. Like, quite candidly, they should not be one of the top contenders going into the first major. For LAT, I think, this is a pretty good position to be in, all things considered, with how uncompetitive they looked for the first, I guess the middle part of the qualifiers, where they couldn't win a map against either Paris or Toronto. To go to round 11, game 5 against Carolina, to win some of these matches that some people were like, all right, I don't know if you're able to beat OpTic, for example. I think this is a good position for them. They have a chance. They certainly can win Major 1. Like, there's no doubt about that. This is a wide open major, it seems, and they have a very good opportunity to kind of, quote-unquote, steal this major when people aren't really expecting them to do so. So I'm very interested to see how both these teams play against each other or separately. It's going to be a banger. I think there are going to be some hard feelings, I think, after that round 1 match. You can't call them onliners, basically, and then expect there not to be some kind of harsh feelings after their match when they get to land. Like, that just, I mean, look at E United back in the day, like when they were called onliners and then they won Atlanta. They had a ton of ammunition for everybody that talked shit about them for months. So I think Carolina will have that if they come out hot against LAT. The last match was just like the biggest anticlimax like we've seen in recent CDL history. We talked about it. It didn't make a lot of sense that this match went on last over LAT versus Carolina. It would have been perfect to finish on a game 5 round 11 with LAT Carolina. Instead, we got a 3-0 sweep by FaZe over the Vancouver Surge. So literally a number 1 seed, contender versus the dead last team. This was not very competitive. I wouldn't say it was like a complete dominant performance in every, this wasn't like LAT versus Paris where it was like, I don't know if these two teams are even playing the same game. It did seem like Vancouver had some moments, certainly, but this was just a pretty decisive win for FaZe. Any kind of thoughts on FaZe finishing this out 3-0?
Yeah, I thought that this was what we kind of talked about last episode when it was looking like a 3-way tie at the top of the standings between OpTic, Falcons, and FaZe. And I said FaZe had the best potential route to the 1 seed just because of this favorable matchup as long as they got the 3-0, and they were able to do so. It was a little bit closer, not like a super close match, but especially the start of the hard point and the first 3 rounds of the S&D went to Vancouver before FaZe won 6 in a row. But really, this was MVP Simp just taking over. Abuza played very well, 30 and 20 in the map 1 and 29 and 21 in the overload. But Simp was 27 and 22 map 1, 13 and 6 in map 2, and 40 and 24, which I alluded to earlier. 40 from Simp is the overload record for the current Black Ops 6 season, and he surpassed Lurks, who did 39 just 2 days prior. So short-lived record by the rookie, and big picture for FaZe. Saw Brian Stats, shout out Brian Stats 1 on Twitter. He tweeted, in his 8th season, Simp leads stage 1 in KD with a 1.19. The last time he led a stage in KD was all the way back in stage 5 of Cold War. And he posted all of the different players to lead, like the qualifiers or I've said this before. The whole stage thing kind of died with the CWL, so I haven't been using that classification for the system in the CDL. So I don't know if this includes the majors or this is just like the online qualifiers before the major. But regardless, like this is looking back to Simp doing something he hasn't done since Cold War. Like that's got to be a scary notion for a lot of teams out there if Sim's potentially rounding into MVP form very, very early this year. It is just a match against Vancouver here, but obviously overall for the set of qualifiers we have so far for him to have the highest KD, pretty good sign for people who were debating in the offseason the stuff of, oh no, what's it going to look like without the tiny terriers, yada yada. Like, Sim still shoots pretty straight, pretty good at Call of Duty.
I mean, he was certainly when FaZe was kind of struggling to find their feet really early on in this, in the qualifiers, he was the most consistent part of the team, and that was like really clear to watch. And so it's not very surprising that he finished the stage or whatever with the highest KD. He is one of the best CDL players currently. He's one of the best of all time. So, and he's not that far away from his peak. I don't know. I guess if he wins like a world championship or something this year, we could say that his peak just never really ended. It was, you know, a little bit of a dip here and there, but yeah, he's awesome. And I think if he's able to keep that up and FaZe just kind of rounds into form as a complete team, because obviously they don't have a ton of experience playing with this foursome, they're a really dangerous team. And that leaves, like, what do you do with a Luka at that point? He's just sitting there, and he just won the North American Challengers Cup with Omit Brooklyn. Him, Fellow, Brack, and Manny. They beat Falcons Academy Green in the NA Grand Finals. In the EU, or I think this was so the NA.
I couldn't find the
Elite.
I don't know if you had a Challengers Cup or not. I didn't see anything tweeted about it.
Yeah, so they won the Challengers Cup, but then Challengers Elite Stage 1 playoffs, that went to Project 7 Notorious, and that was Awakening, Ulysses, Too Real, and Geo. So, and Juju, the Don, as the coach, you know, we got to shout him out there.
Shout out the Silent Razorback.
Challengers Elite went to Clutch Rain, which is a French team, Brezzy, Cobra, Linz, and Melko. So obviously a bunch of former French CDL players in that group as well. I want to shout that out. Pick'em to this point, we both went 5-3 this week, which is honestly one of our best weeks in quite some time, because it has been a rough go for us trying to predict these matches. So you're 26-16 on the season. I'm 25-17, and Trimmer is winless. And the qualifier standings as they finished, we had 4 teams finish 5-2. We had 2 teams finish 4-3. We had 4 teams finish 3-4, and we had 2 teams finish 1-6. We had literally not one team just have a unique record in this entire major qualifiers. But the way it went was Paris, FaZe, Falcons, and Carolina all finished 5-2 on the qualifiers, but Paris got the number 1 seed, FaZe got number 2, Falcons 3, Carolina 4, and then there was a 2-way tie between LAT and OpTic for 5 and 6. LAT got the 5th seed, OpTic got 6th, and then, like I said earlier, G2, Toronto, Miami, and Boston all finished 3 and 4 for 7th place. But Minnesota and Toronto got those final 2 spots at 7th and 8th, respectively. Miami and Boston finished 9th and 10th, respectively. And then C9 at 11th and Vancouver at 12th after the tiebreaker head-to-head. So that puts the Major 1 tournament bracket set and finalized. It will be Paris versus Toronto in the 1 versus 8, Carolina versus LAT in the 4 versus 5, FaZe versus Minnesota in a rematch of the upset that we saw last week. That is the 2 versus 7. And then the 3 versus 6 is Falcons versus OpTic, which is Pred's revenge match. I think it should be a very, very entertaining set of circumstances there. And then in the losers bracket, of course, we have Miami, Vancouver, Boston, and Cloud9. Those teams will await the losers of the winners round 1 matches. So I think Miami plays the loser of Paris, Toronto. Vancouver plays loser of Carolina, LAT. Boston plays loser of FaZe, G2. And then C9 plays loser of Falcons versus OpTic.
Yeah, gonna save it for tomorrow, but Octane was the one who pointed it out. If Toronto lose round 1 to Paris, we get the Koi versus Miami rivalry match on LAN, loser bracket round 1 for top 12. So that could be a banger, but we'll save it mostly for the preview show. But just to throw a little teaser out, all 4 matches in the winners bracket we have seen already this year during the qualifiers. Two of them we saw this past week. Obviously, G2 versus FaZe we saw a week ago. I believe it was last week.
Yep.
And OpTic versus Falcons was one of the first maps of the season, but things have looked very different from both teams since that first showing. So I'm super excited for this major. All these matches, can't wait to dive into them more with you. Only other thing, since we kind of breezed through that challengers stuff, is shout out Cobra. I mean, winning the elite is one thing. Obviously, Lins and Brezzy have been around. Lins here and there. But Cobra's been that name in challengers seemingly forever on the EU side. He's feel like he's been associated with rumors here and there. We've talked about him numerous times on the pod. Feels like might be too late at this point due to visas and stuff to get him in the CDL, but I'm starting it early. Cobra 2027 CDL. He's got to be on a team to start the next season.
Definitely. And the major will start on Thursday, not Friday, as the qualifiers have been. So Thursday, January 29th is when the first CDL 2026 major begins. We'll go through the rest of the weekend. We will be doing shows on back-to-back days. So this is a Monday live show. We will do a Tuesday live show, and that will be a complete preview of the first major. Please tune in if you're interested in watching live. You can do so on YouTube, or you can do so on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. Please follow the stream, and we're very close to hitting affiliate status, so hopefully you could subscribe in the very near future. So we'll be doing that on Tuesday, and then obviously the feeds will be updated Wednesday morning. So hopefully you can watch or listen to hopefully both of these shows by the time that Major 1 actually kicks off on Thursday afternoon. But please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Like I mentioned, we're at over 275 subscribers on the YouTube channel at this point. You can both follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast tours at Ego Chall Podcast. Like I said, also, you could follow us on Twitch. Again, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can follow Bink on Twitch at twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. And like I said, next show will be tomorrow. And then we will be back after that on probably next Sunday, Sunday night, to talk about all the things that happened during Major 1. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. Appreciate it as always. Really do, appreciate everyone showing up so far this year. The online matches and whatnot, but now it's LAN time, and we're back in the groove of things of these shows. Looking forward to the next episode. Like Preston said last episode, the preview shows are some of our favorites, and we have a lot of fun with those. So hope you guys will tune in and hope you enjoy it as well. And before you know it, we'll be back here and talking about the winner of Major 1 already, and then right after that, getting into Major 2 qualifiers, all that good stuff. So we're in the thick of it now. Looking forward to this season heating up and the first event just in a couple days. Hope you guys are as well. And yeah, thank you as always. Remember to send the chow.